So as Ellen was mentioning, I will give you the provisionary results of the agroecological portfolio of the EU from the period of analysis 2018-2020. So as Ellen was saying, it's ongoing. So I'm just giving you some results, but it's still happening. So there is in total 948 contracts that are analyzed within the SANAD sector between 2018 and 2020. And those contracts are mainly on the African continent. Part of them are already in South America and Central America for 16%. And it doesn't appear on that slide, but also Asia for 15%. I'm not going to go further in the methodology, but just to give you some ideas of the tools and method we're using. We use a filter on the 948 contracts to see in which contracts those words appear. So they are agroecology, permaculture, ecological agriculture, food sovereignty or food autonomy, knowing that we have that in French, English, Spanish, and Portuguese. And we consider that if one of the projects contain one of those words, we kept the project to do that eco analysis. Then we put a second filter that is not as essential, that it has two categories, the type of agriculture and the social and environmental impact. It was a way to see whether there were components that were close to the agroecological ideals. So we thought it was interesting to look into them, not as part of agroecology, but more to compare them to the agroecology portfolio and see what similarities there might be between the different projects. So I'll present the results of the first filter. So the ones that are quite clearly shown agro-ecological ambition. So within the main portfolio, 6% of the contracts specifically mention an agroecological ambition. Means that some words of the first filter were mentioned, and mainly agroecology. Also, knowing that permaculture is almost not used, and food sovereignty is used a bit more, but not that much. And it's more for South America. I've decided for that presentation, because it's quite short, to give you the results from the actor's point of view, because we discussed that with other speakers, and I mentioned it last week, sorry. But you need to keep in mind that it's a multi-actor project, and it's been carried mainly by scientists. And then it's been taken over by different groups, farmers, but also just from the civil society, and that has allowed to just expand a bit the scope of that concept. So on the right-hand side, you have a scheme that is hard to read, but it gives you a bit the evolution of agroecology, how it really was included years by years within the more general food and agro-food systems. So slowly, agroecology became part of the debate in partly, mainly the last 10 years. And it's been, the FAO has played a big role in this. And it's contributed to have a more theoretical approach to agroecology, in particular with the formulation of the 10 elements that constitute agroecology and the 13 principles that were presented last week. So I'm not going back onto that. But what's interesting to put forward is that at the end of the day, agroecology is part of the debate and the policy in different organizations like the UN or other international organizations. But if you look the EU portfolio, it shows that within the SANAD one, only 6.5% of the project are showing clearly an agroecologic ambition. And for the FAO, who put agroecology in their agenda, it's only 34.4% of the project. It's the same thing for international NGOs. They only represent 6.5% of the projects that are implemented within the partnership with the EU. If we look at research projects, the ratio reaches 34.4%, but it's because the CIRA is working a lot on that. So the question here is to wonder whether why there is such a gap between the ambitions that are shown by the UN and other international organizations and the actual projects. So I'm formulating hypotheses here. It's not a concrete response. We don't have them. One of the hypothesis would be it's just theoretical and rhetorical for the moment. The second one would be that projects are financed by other partners, but in this case, why not by the EU? Is that because there's not enough space for agroecological project, or is it because there is a rejection of such projects, or is it because the European Union image is not associated enough with agroecology? Or third option, is it because the choice of executive partners is too closed, and there's not enough space for local civil societies organization? Those people could be farmer association or association that defend human rights and so on. So the question is, how can we change that over? We mentioned it last week already, but it would be to identify the key actors in each countries. I mean, at country level, but also at more regional region level as well. Can be in the ministries, in the civil society, in the private sector, in the cooperation agencies, or international NGOs. All those people that could be leaders within agroecology, but also identify who could block that, who are here to slow things down. Another solution could be to be more explicit in the call for proposition, the aspect of agroecology, and also maybe diversify the entry doors by not only limiting to the SANAD sector, but also go further, for instance, human rights, land, ownership, civil society, and gender, other entry doors for agroecology.
Étudiés. Encore une fois, ce sont des résultats provisoires.
Looking at the portfolio that we looked at, mainly it's associated to climate change and its temporary results, I remind you. The co-creation and share of knowledge is also quite important, knowing that it's almost systematically mentioned in the DESIRA program. So that's kind of a bias because the co-creation and share of knowledge is always mentioned. And to a certain extent, the gender is here as well. So as I said, biodiversity is not here and civil society hardly not as well. So agroecology implies a change of paradigm, which means that very often the projects are limited to farming practices at the farm level or at landscape level. And the objectives are very often to increase productivity and in fine have a better food safety. It's a very, classic, usual kind of approach towards food safety that target mainly farming techniques, when it should take into account more social or political aspects on how and other aspects like intrants, how you fix prices, access to land, and interdependency within society, and sharing of the roles between men and women, between landowners and farmers with no land, and so on. So it means that changing agricultural practice has social impact, and in part on the sharing of the work, knowing that a society is built on how things are shared between people, economically speaking, but also within the household. And if we go back on the land, that question of having land that is more fertile, where the soil is more fertile, that's why I put on the right-hand side who benefits from more fertile soils, lands, because in places where the land is not secure, it means that you can lose your land for landowners. Will have for them, it's really interesting to get back lands that now are very fertile when they were not before. So this is a question, and these are topics that we really need to take into account. That's why we look into them, and they need to be looked into when you're putting in place an agroecology project. Which means that we need to change our point of view, and we need to change the way we look at things. So it's an open discussion, but we could introduce more social sciences in the research in agroecology, for instance, the DESIRA program, maybe by being more in touch with local actors and work with them more, and then by incitating actors to have a new, and stakeholders to look at things in a different way and in a more holistic way.